esas sesiones y de los diferentes grupos que también hemos podido compartir con ustedes. Y bueno, de forma siguiente vamos a ver algunos aspectos técnicos de este espacio y luego la gente. Siguiente, por favor. Recuerden también de que contamos con, para las personas que nos acompañan desde el espacio en Zoom, tenemos interpretación y esta sesión también estará grabada en inglés y español para que en el momento que deseen compartirla o volver a escuchar, está disponible en el canal de YouTube de la plataforma Let's Learn. Siguiente, por favor. Recuerden también que este espacio será grabado, como les estábamos mencionando, y que por las diferentes plataformas vamos a recibir comentarios, vamos a recibir también sus preguntas para que en ese espacio que tendremos más adelante podamos ir resolviéndolas. Y que recordarles que también al final del espacio tenemos preguntas y respuestas para aquellos que se animen a compartir por ahí algún comentario extra. Siguiente, por favor. Entonces, revisemos rápidamente la agenda. Vamos a tener un pequeño espacio de bienvenida, donde también tendremos alguna recapitulación de cómo ha sido estos 2 años de programa de GIF4LAC. Luego de ello pasaremos una breve introducción a la temática a cargo de Nergis Ulazán, que nos estará acompañando con estos conceptos para poder pasar ya luego a la presentación de las experiencias, donde también tenemos a dos representantes muy interesantes que nos traen toda la experiencia respecto a taxonomías que vamos a ver el día de hoy. Finalmente vamos a pasar a un espacio de preguntas y respuestas, las conclusiones del espacio donde nos está acompañando Rocío García y finalmente el cierre a la sesión donde estaremos también viendo una recapitulación de todo este evento. Entonces, pasamos a la siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Bueno, vuelvo a presentar. Soy Grecia
So
Gutiérrez,
again,
coordinadora del
my
programa
name is
de
Grecia
conocimientos de
Gutierrez.
GIF4LAC y muy feliz de
I
estar en esta
am the
oportunidad
Knowledge Management
con
Program
ustedes.
Coordinator
Por
at
favor.
GIF4LAC. It's a pleasure for me being here with you.
Este es nuestro recorrido de forma general.
This is a little bit on our journey. I really like this slide because it really allows us
muy visual y muy linda cómo ha sido ese trabajo
to see in a very visual way
nuestra última sesión, solo para
our
que puedan
work
recordar que
starting
también conceptos
2024 up to
instrumentos y
this
que están
final
disponibles
session. I would like to remind you that all of these instruments are available for you through our platform.
Y bueno, le doy la bienvenida.
And now I would like to welcome and give the floor to Montserrat, who is joining us on behalf of the UNDP. Thank you so much. You have the floor, Montserrat. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for allowing us to share a little bit on this session. And we've been closing this sixth final session regarding the Knowledge Management Program on green financing strategies and instruments in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is a part of GIF4LAC initiative through the International Cooperation Swedish Agency. When we first started off this space, we started off with a very important premise, because we understand that there are a lot of opportunities in terms of green financing. However, there was a very tangible challenge. How can we move through institutionality and different processes to be able to find these strategies and make them sustainable through time? So in other words, how can we translate these opportunities to a big scale and be able to sustain them through time? So that's why we designed this cycle, to be able to create more visibility and exchange to facilitate solutions and the replication of strategies throughout the whole Latin American region. And for that, we have brought different specialists to be able to implement these instruments, such as green finance, INFFs, payments for results as private investment strategies. And through all these series of conversations, we've got many different conversations that have appeared in many different ways. And this also creates an opportunity for us to reflect on many different things. The first one is on the relevance of institutionality to be able to strengthen the governance of the instruments for green financing and how we can work together, how we can coordinate, and to share different endeavors to be able to enrich these opportunities. And for me, this is fundamental. The second one is the value of an active participation of the different shareholders, starting from the private sector up to the regional governments, for example. And this collaboration ensures the success on this collaborative effort. Third, the regulatory frameworks at an institutional level are crucial to enable all of these strategies and solutions. This creates sustainability and to ensure transparent systems for accountability. And this creates a really crystal clear vision for all of us who are interested in green financing. And again, how can we strengthen capabilities, not only through an exchange learning system, but through different opportunities that will create feedback, and how we can also improve and scale all of the systems at a regional, national, and international level for us to broaden our vision. And last but not least, we have identified that there is this will of orienting these green finance instruments in a more sustainable way at a big scale. We have confirmed that the solutions, when they are well done, they are really enabling different opportunities and solutions to provide more financing. And during the year, we have been documenting these real honest conversations with all the lessons learned, and we're going to publish these conversations into 2 different reports that we hope to publish throughout this year. And we have learned many different lessons that have led us to reflect on a broader conversation. The public financial flows and the governance is very important. They do not only depend on the private investment, but there's also a budgetary decision through the whole different instruments that need to include several taxonomies, such as the green taxonomies and climate policies, since this helps us to accomplish or to achieve the NDCs. Today, we will listen from the experience of Chile and Mexico on how they were able to align the public investment with these green financing initiatives. And I would like to mention that even if it is the last session of this cycle, this is not our final work. We will continue to provide support to the countries of the region to keep innovating on green financing through a new mechanism that is led by the UNDP, that is oriented to climate resilience and green finance through the whole region. At the UNDP, we want to always innovate and create technological frameworks that will provide sustainable and clean energies to different industries. I would like to thank all of our participants for their commitment, accountability, and interest in sharing this vision from and for Latin America, since this is a very important step to foster competitiveness and to strengthen our economies with one vision, with one shared vision. I would like to again thank deeply our colleagues from Chile and Mexico. Let's have a great session.
Muchas gracias, Montserrat, por tus palabras. En realidad ha sido un camino
Thank you,
bastante
Montserrat, for
retador, pero
your
a la vez
words.
muy
It has
gratificante
been a really
conocer todas
challenging
estas
journey, but at the
experiencias y
same
también
time, a
a
really
todas las
wonderful
personas que nos han
journey.
acompañado
It's
de
been
países de
great
la
to be able
región
to
y también
have
las
all of
otras
this experience
oportunidades que
and
hemos
lessons
podido
learned shared. I
mostrarles
would like to
en el
again
camino
thank
hacia
all of the
la
representatives
implementación de
coming
estos
from
instrumentos de
different
financiamiento
regions
verde. Y
from
también nos
the
emociona que
country.
estos espacios son espacios para crear sinergias y creo que ese es el impacto que también estamos buscando, conectar
And I think that is also the
y
impact that we're
lograr
looking for, to be
discutir
able to create
estos
these
instrumentos y
connections and to be
también
able
todas las
to
lecciones
strengthen
aprendidas
all of
que
these
nos han
instruments and to
podido
apply all the lessons
compartir.
learned that we've
Muchas
had.
gracias nuevamente y a
Thank you so
continuación le doy
much
la
again.
bienvenida a
And
Nergis
then
Gulasan, quien es
now I would like to give
especialista
the floor
regional en
to
finanzas
Nergis
para los Objetivos de
Gulasan, who
Desarrollo
is the regional
Sostenible
specialist in financing
y nos
for
va a
the
brindar este
SDGs
espacio
at the
introductorio, pero
UNDP,
también
and she
muy
will
importante
provide
saber que tanto las
some
experiencias de
introductory
México y de Chile que
words
vienen después puedan también complementarse con esta
before
información.
the
Entonces,
experience
Nergis,
of Chile
bienvenida
and
nuevamente.
Mexico.
Muchas
So
gracias.
thank you so much, Nergis. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Muy buenos
Thank you so
días, buenas
much.
tardes
Good
a
morning, good
todas y todos
afternoon
y gracias
to
por
everyone.
acompañarnos.
And thank you
La
so much
conversación de hoy
for joining
se
us today.
sitúa en la
So today's
intersección entre
conversation
política climática y
is
las finanzas públicas,
in
las
between
finanzas
climate
sostenibles,
policy and
una
sustainable
intersección que
finance.
está
This is an
adquiriendo cada vez
intersection
mayor relevancia
that
para los gobiernos
is
americanos
getting
y el Caribe.
more
Y
relevance
durante la
to the
última
governments
década,
of Latin
los países de
America
la
and
región
the
han
Caribbean. And during the
asumido
last
compromisos
decades, the countries of
importantes
the
en
region
materia de
have
acción
taken very
climática y desarrollo
important
sostenible. El
commitments
desafío ahora
in
no es
terms of
solo
climate
a qué
action
nos
and sustainable
comprometemos,
development.
sino
So now the
cómo
challenge
traducimos
is
esos
not
compromisos
how we
en
can
decisiones
further commit,
presupuestarias,
but how we
flujos
can rather
financieros y en
translate these
acciones reales
commitments
sobre el
into
terreno.
budgetary decisions,
En
financial
este
flows, and
contexto
real
han
investments
surgido
on the field.
dos
So
herramientas
in this
especialmente
context, we've got
relevantes.
two
La primera
different
es
and
la
relevant
medición del
tools. The
gasto
first one is
público
how we can
vinculado a
measure
la
the
acción
public
climática.
expenditure that is linked to the
Entonces,
climate
al
action. So
identificar,
in order for us
etiquetar
to,
y
so
hacer
while we are
seguimiento del gasto
identifying
relacionado con el clima
and
dentro de
tracking
los
these
presupuestos
expenditures
nacionales, los gobiernos
related to
pueden
climate
entender mejor cuánto
within the
están
national
invirtiendo
budgets,
realmente
the
en
governments are
acciones
able
de
to have a better
adaptación,
understanding
evaluar
on
la alineación con sus
where their
objetivos
investments are
climáticos
going
y
to
mejorar la
mitigate and adapt to
transparencia y
climate
la
change, and
rendición de
how they can
cuentas.
assess
Además,
their
estos
alignment
sistemas ayudan a
to
los ministerios de
their climate
Hacienda
goals.
a pasar de ver el clima como un tema
And
sectorial
again,
a
all of these
reconocerlo
systems
como una prioridad
support the
fiscal
different
y de
ministries of
desarrollo estatal.
finance to be able to
Y
see
la
climate or to
segunda
consider
herramienta
climate
son
as
las
a
taxonomías de
sectorial
finanzas
topic
sostenibles.
and to
Las
acknowledge climate
taxonomies
as a fiscal
proporcionan un
priority
lenguaje común para
and of
definir
central
qué
development.
se
The
considera
second tool
ambientalmente
is
sostenible
basically the
y cada
taxonomies
vez
of
más
sustainable finance.
contribuye
And
a los
we
objetivos
want to
climáticos.
provide this common
Las
language from these
taxonomías
taxonomies
ayudan
to be able
a
to
alinear
define
políticas
what is
públicas,
considered to be
instituciones
sustainable
financieras,
at an
inversionistas
environmental
y bancos
level
de desarrollo
and what
en torno
supports
a
the climate goals.
definiciones compartidas, reduciendo la
And we
incertidumbre
want
y
to
el
have
riesgo de
different
greenwashing
shared
y
definitions
orientando
to
el
reduce
capital hacia
uncertainty and the risk
actividades
of
prioritarias.
greenwashing and to orient the
En América
capital
Latina y
towards
el Caribe
more
estamos viendo
prioritary
avances
activities.
rápidos en
In the
ambos
LAC region, we're
frentes.
seeing
Países
some quick
como Chile,
advancements.
México,
We see the
Colombia y
experiences of
Brasil
Chile, Mexico, Colombia,
están
and Brazil
desarrollando
that are
taxonomías
developing
nacionales,
national
implementando
taxonomies,
sistemas de
that are
etiquetado
implementing
presupuestario y
uh,
utilizando
budgetary
estas
tracking
herramientas
systems,
para
and that are
alinear
using all
mejor
of these
las
tools to
finanzas
have a better
públicas y
alignment of
privadas
their
con sus
public and
objetivos
private finance
climáticos y de
with their
desarrollo.
own climate
Y
and
en este
development
contexto,
goals.
el PNUD ha
So in this
venido
context, the
apoyando a los
UNDP
gobiernos
has
de
been
la región
supporting the
mediante asistencia
regional
técnica,
government
por
by
ejemplo, con el
providing technical
etiquetado
assistance
presupuestario
in, for
climático y
example, again, the
proyecciones de
climate
gasto,
budgetary
apoyo
tracking,
al
as well
diseño
as
e implementación
reviewing
de
the
taxonomías de
expenditure,
finanzas
as well as
sostenibles
providing
y también
support
a
on the
través de
design and
promoción de la
implementation of
coherencia entre
the
las
sustainable
taxonomías,
finance
los marcos
taxonomies,
fiscales,
and
los planes
promoting the
nacionales de
coherence or
desarrollo y las
consistency
estrategias
among the
climáticas.
taxonomies and
A
all of the
nivel
different
regional, el PNUD
relevant
también
frameworks. At a
ha
regional level, The UNDP has also co-led alongside our partners from the United Nations and some other international financial entities, the development of the common framework of the taxonomies for sustainable finance for Latin America and the Caribbean. So this framework, what it does is to support the countries to be able to build more aligned taxonomies with the international best practices that will reflect at the same time their own regional and national priorities on the development side, as well as on the institutional side. With that, we want to tailor a more coherent green finance architecture. I think that what I find most valuable on this panel is that we're going to go beyond the theory. We will hear directly the lessons learned of the specialists who have been implementing these tools, both from the public finance perspective as the development finance institutions experience. We will start off with a first round on the motivations, and then we will go ahead to talk about the implementation experiences. And last but not least, we will reflect on the lessons learned and the impact. First, I would like to give the floor to Maria Ignacia Lopez. She's an advisor at the Office of Sustainable Finance at the Ministry of Finance in Chile. Chile is one of the pioneer countries regarding public expenditure, and last year they published a national taxonomy regarding sustainable finance. So Maria, can you start off by sharing what was the main motivation of Chile in order for the country to make advancements on these topics?
Hola, Nergis.
Hello, Nergis. Are you able to hear me well? Yes, go ahead, please.
Gracias, primero agradecer la invitación.
All right, thank you so much for having me in the first place. And I would like to greet everyone who's watching. So for this question regarding the motivation, I think that the first question was, how can the state understand these topics, and how can we create how can we duplicate experiences coming from different countries? So we are far behind in comparison to other regions such as Europe or Asia, for example. And then all of this was reflected in 2019. And then we started off by reviewing these topics that were not just a matter of the Ministry of the Environment, but were becoming more relevant to some other ministries. And then in 2022, a finance office was founded within the Ministry of Finance, and then this created a precedent of the relevance of this topic. And I think that at the same time, the public sector interest was also very heavy. For example, the taxonomy that we launched last year, we thought that it was going to be an initiative relevant for the private sector only. How can they support us? But then again, we saw a lot of interest coming from the public sector. And I think that all of these topics are no longer odd or uncommon throughout the country. We see that the Ministry of Finance is having a relevant role on making advancements towards sustainable finance and climate policies. And last week, I was at this UNDP event, and there was a lot of exchanges on the lessons learned in the past 5 years. So I learned a lot from that session. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Maria. Now I would like to give the floor to Eric Rodriguez Maldonado. He's the Deputy Director for Environment, Trust Funds for Rural Development, also known as FIRA, in Mexico. Eric, can you kindly share what is FIRA's mission to those who may not be familiar with its work. And I would also like to ask you, we know that FIRA has experience in designing international taxonomies as well as contributing to the development of Mexico's sustainable taxonomy. Could you explain why the development of taxonomies has been a priority for Mexico?
Muchas gracias. Y bueno, pues primero que nada,
Thank you so
agradecer la
much.
invitación y muy
First
buenos
of all, I
días,
would like
a
to
todos los
thank you for
asistentes.
having me. Good morning,
Eh,
everyone.
FIRA somos una institución financiera de desarrollo.
So FIRA
con
is
funciones análogas a un
a
banco nacional de
sustainable
desarrollo, ¿no?
finance
Entonces,
development
realmente lo que
organization.
hacemos es prestar
So
servicios
basically what we
financieros
do
al
is that
sector
we
agroalimentario en todo México,
provide
principalmente
financial
a través
services
de
to the
préstamos y
whole
de
agronomical
garantías,
sector in
un poco de asistencia
Mexico
técnica
through
también,
bonds.
y lo
We
hacemos
also
desde
provide a
un
little
segundo
bit
piso.
of technical
Esto es, pues
assistance, and
nosotros
we
no
do that
brindamos
through a
nuestros
second
servicios
floor.
financieros
That means that
directamente,
we
sino a
do not
través de
provide
intermediarios financieros, que pues son
the
normalmente
financial
bancos,
services
instituciones
directly, but
financieras no
through
bancarias, cajas,
our
sociedades
partners.
cooperativas, etcétera.
And these can be financial
Todas ellas
institutions such as
operan en el
banks
medio rural y o en el
and
sector
other financial
agroalimentario, ¿no? También
institutions.
la visión de FIRA es financiamiento de toda la cadena. Entonces, no solamente nos
And
quedamos en la
FIRA's
producción primaria,
mission
en los
is
cultivos,
to
por
provide
ejemplo,
support
propiamente, sino que
throughout
también
the whole
podemos apoyar
chain.
la distribución,
And this
la
is through
logística,
the
el
agri-food sector
procesamiento, etcétera, ¿no? Ese es a grandes
and all of
rasgos,
its
digamos, la visión de
stages.
FIRA. Centrándonos un
So
poquito
that
más
would
ya en el
be
tema que nos
a quick
ocupa,
overview on FIRA's
uno de los
mission.
tres
Now, moving
objetivos
forward to the
prioritarios que tiene FIRA
taxonomies, one of
actualmente
the
tiene que
three
ver con el
goals
desarrollo
of
sostenible.
FIRA has to
Para
do with
nosotros es una
sustainable
misión. Hemos
development.
visto que hay grandes retos
So
en el
for us, we
sector
have identified that
agroalimentario,
there
no
are
solo en México, en el
big
mundo. Y
challenges
obviamente
in the
el
agri-food
hacer
sector, not only in
financiamiento
Mexico,
sostenible,
but
pues
in the world. So we want to
es un
create
compromiso también,
green
¿no? Es una
green
responsabilidad que
financing, which is
tenemos debido
also
a que pues,
a
ya
responsibility and a
las
commitment
políticas
that
de
we
desarrollo han
have,
cambiado
because
muchísimo
we
en los
understand
últimos
that
años y
the
ya no se
development
busca
policies have
solamente, pues
changed a
digamos,
lot in the
producir
past
más o
years.
tener mayor
And it's not
rentabilidad,
only a
sino también
matter of
hacerlo
just
con
creating
respeto al
more
medio ambiente y a la
profitability or
sociedad.
producing more,
Entonces,
but
en
we
ese
want
sentido,
to
mucho
create a
de nuestra
positive impact
misión
in
es
society and in
lograr
the
remover
environment.
esas
So
barreras
I think
financieras
that
a
our top
proyectos que
goal
tengan
would
estos
be
beneficios
to remove
al medio
such
ambiente y a la
financial
sociedad,
barriers in the
por lo
world.
menos que ese no sea la barrera que limite
We don't
el
want
desarrollo de
to
estos
have
proyectos. Ese es
that as a
nuestro
barrier for
anhelo.
these projects to come
Y en
to
este
life.
sentido,
That
para
is our
nosotros hemos
interest and
participado
motivation.
activamente
And
desde
in that
más o
sense,
menos
we
el
have been
2018
participating very
construimos nuestra
actively
primera
since
taxonomía. Esta
2018,
fue una taxonomía
in the year
interna,
in which we
en
launched
donde
our
teníamos un
first
reto. Y el
internal
reto era claro
taxonomy.
para nosotros, y es que
And we
era
had this
cómo
big
podemos
challenge.
identificar
How
o tener
can
un
we
lenguaje
really
común para
identify
tener
and
proyectos o
provide a
identificar
common
proyectos
language
sostenibles
to be
para
able to
direccionar financiamiento de
identify
organismos financieros internacionales
sustainable
que en ese momento nos
projects,
estaban
to
apoyando?
be able
Entonces, la
to
necesidad era como muy práctica,
get
muy
proper
real, y
support
fue así
of the
como creamos una
international entities
primera
that were supporting us
taxonomía.
at that time. So
Obviamente,
that
al paso
was
del tiempo,
how
pues se ha
we
ido
created our
avanzando
first
muchísimo los
taxonomy. And then
temas.
through
Hoy
time,
tenemos
we
tres
have made
taxonomías
a lot of advancements.
diferentes
We
en FIRA.
currently
Una de
have three different
proyectos sostenibles,
taxonomies
que
at
es
FIRA.
evaluar
One of
aspectos
them is
ambientales,
regarding
sociales y
sustainable
económicos de los
development
proyectos
that
que
touches
financiamos.
different types of
Otra que es
impact.
exclusivamente para
Then we
inversiones
have
en adaptación
another
y
one that
resiliencia
is
al cambio
specifically
climático,
for
en donde
investments
ya adoptamos
done
una visión
for
un poco más
climate
territorial, porque
resilience,
los
in
cambios
which we
climáticos, sus
have a
efectos, pues,
more
son muy localizados, obviamente, y de diferentes
land-wise
maneras en
perspective, let's
diferentes
say.
partes del territorio. Y acabamos
And
de
then
crear, por así decir,
we just
una sobre
created
pesca y
another
acuacultura sostenible,
taxonomy
la cual de hecho pues,
for
fue la
fishing,
base para una
for
emisión justo de
sustainable
un bono
fishing and
temático, un
sustainable
bono azul.
agriculture.
Y
And we
justamente
got that
dentro de
through the
estas
Blue
tres
Bond.
taxonomías, ahora ha ido
And then
evolucionando no solamente para
we have
direccionar
been making
recursos de organismos
advancements
financieros internacionales, que dan un
with
gran
all of
apoyo
these
siempre a las
three
instituciones,
taxonomies
sino
and by
también
getting
utilizando
more
el
support
mercado de deuda,
from
¿no?
different
Haciendo emisiones temáticas
organizations
recurrentes.
and by
FIRA
using
emite
debt
regularmente bonos verdes, azules,
to
sociales,
get
etcétera, y estamos trabajando justo
green,
en esta
blue
cuestión de ayer.
bonds, social
Pero
bonds.
efectivamente, con esa
And this is
experiencia es que
something that
nosotros
we are
participamos
actively
de
working
la
on.
iniciativa liderada por el Gobierno de México, por la Secretaría de Hacienda y Crédito Público, el equivalente al Ministerio de Finanzas en muchos otros países,
And then
para
the
que
equivalent of the
tengamos
Ministry of
autonomía
Finance
nacional, ¿no?
in
Porque
Mexico
efectivamente, pues el tener una
helps us
taxonomía propia, pues
with
es
one
muy
of
adecuado para
the
los estudiantes
taxonomies to
que
build a
teníamos. A
national
nivel país
taxonomy.
era necesario poder definir
Because at
internamente
a country
cuáles
level,
eran
it was very important
los
to
tipos
really
de proyectos
define
que iban a
what
ser
were the
que
kind
poder
of
calificar como
projects that we
sostenibles.
wanted
Y hoy por
to
hoy, en esta primera etapa
identify
de
as
desarrollo de la taxonomía
sustainable.
sostenible de México, está completamente, o digamos, está enfocada prioritariamente en la mitigación de gases de efecto invernadero
So now
y ha definido pues
basically
algunos otros condiciones de
this
no tan
tracking has to do
significativos y un
on
componente muy
mitigating the
importante
emission of
transversal de
greenhouse
género también
gases. And then again, we
que
have
hay
a
que tener en cuenta.
cross-sectional
Entonces, la
perspective
taxonomía
of
es
gender
muy
that we're
completa, un
taking into
esfuerzo
account. So
muy grande,
the
multisectorial y
efforts
multiactores.
are
Hubo participación de la
multisectoral.
iniciativa privada, de otras instancias de gobierno, de bancos
And then
privados,
there have
públicos. Entonces, la verdad es
been
que fue un proceso muy rico
there has been the
y desde Chile,
participation
pues
of
nosotros
different other
aportamos
entities
en
such
el
as
desarrollo de estas
banks,
taxonomías,
some other
diseñando las
agencies, and
metas
then we
de
help
los
them
sectores de
design and
agricultura,
build these
del
taxonomies
sector forestal
alongside
y de
the
ganadería.
agricultural
Entonces,
sector,
la verdad es de
the
que
agri-food sector, and
tomando en
some
cuenta el
others.
2018 y ahora lo que tenemos,
And
si,
then
si en el
now
2018 habíamos tenido este esfuerzo
we
nacional,
started
creo que
off
nos
in
habíamos ahorrado
2018, and
pues
then now I
mucho
think
trabajo.
that we have
Y hoy por
saved
hoy, la verdad es
us
que este
a lot of
instrumento que
work
tenemos en México es de
since
muchísima
then.
ayuda para
And
poder
then
fijar
in
una postura
Mexico,
nacional de
we
cuáles
are
son las
lucky that we
prioridades
have a
que
lot of
pueden,
support on
sobre todo,
how we can
obedecer al
really
cumplimiento de nuestra NDC, de
organize our
nuestra
priorities that
contribución
are
nacionalmente
really
determinada. Y la verdad es
helping
que la
us
Secretaría
to
de México
achieve
hace
the
un trabajo
NDCs.
fabuloso en ese sentido.
And I think that fantastic work has been done
Muchísimas
since then.
gracias, ambos por contextualizar el tema.
Thank you for providing a
Ahora me gustaría
context on the
volver
topic.
con
I would like
María.
to go
María,
back to
¿cómo fue
Maria.
el proceso de
Maria,
implementación
can
de
you
la
mention
medición
how
del
has been the process on
gasto público
expense,
vinculado
public
con
expense
la acción climática en Chile?
measurement or assessment related to climatic action?
Sí, a ver, nosotros empezamos con este tema
Yes.
también hace bastante y ahí
We
un dato
started
que
a
decía
while
Eric,
ago,
nosotros
and
tenemos
aligned to what Eric
como
was
compromiso y
saying,
objetivos como
we
país.
are
En el
keeping some
2015, ya con nuestra
objectives
primera
as a
NDC,
country. In
establecimos ciertas
2015, with
metas y
our
objetivos que
first
queríamos lograr,
NDC, we established the
que
goals that we
ser
wanted
compromisos
to
bastante
achieve.
ambiciosos,
In the beginning, we were
pero
quite
todo alrededor
anxious,
de proyectos, ejecutar proyectos y cómo hacer el
and we
país más
wanted to
autosostenible.
execute
Pero ahí nos
the
empezamos a preguntar, bueno,
project
pero
more
realmente
in a more
cuánto estamos
sustainable way.
gastando en estos compromisos.
And to
Y establecimos como
mention
ya en la
the
NDC del
expense in
2020
this
directamente un
commitment,
compromiso, que era avanzar hacia un marco
I
fiscal
think
de medición
that
de gasto público en
we
cambio
needed
climático.
to based on
Y ahí
the
empezamos
special
con
measurement
una segunda
on
idea de entender, bueno, cuánto está
climate
gastando el
change, and we
país,
needed to understand
cómo se
how
mide
was
esto.
the
Y ahí
country
obviamente el apoyo
expending its
de Eric
money. How are we going to
con su
measuring
principio de
this as well
crecimiento
with the
para armar este
support
marco
of
fiscal de
UNDP
medición
to
de gasto
establish
climático
this
fue fundamental porque
taxing
empezamos a hacer los
framework?
primeros
This was
pilotos de medición,
fundamental. We started
obviamente
doing the
expost,
first
tratando de entender
measurement pilots
cuánto
or
de lo que uno
assessment
ayudaba
pilots
iba a
to
gasto, iba a
understand
gasto
how
climático,
much
entendiendo que también
was
hay
leading
una factura
towards
de presupuesto que muchas veces no
climate
está escrita en
expenses,
realidad, porque el presupuesto se divide, por
because
ejemplo,
sometimes the budget
cuánto va a
is
inversión,
divided
cuánto va en salarios,
in
pero no hacia qué
investment, in
objetivo va.
wages, but not
Entonces,
regards
a partir
to
de ahí se
what
desarrollaron ya los
objective is
primeros
leading
casos de
towards.
estudio en que se
And
analizó,
we have the
se
first
desarrolló una metodología
study cases. We
utilizada por
developed a
distintos gobiernos,
methodology. We did
al
a
Ministerio del
ministry
Ambiente, a la
work,
Dirección de
which
Presupuestos, al
was linked
mismo
to the Ministry of
Hacienda,
the
a INEFA,
Environment,
al PNUD, al Ministerio
the
de Desarrollo Social, que tiene la Administración
UNDP,
de
and the
Inversión, y nos
Ministry
sentamos en
of
una mesa,
Social Development. We
como
sat
importamos
together,
esta visión más
and
territorial
we
desde la
have a
perspectiva de cada
vision
uno. Nos
that
sentamos en una
included
mesa
the
y definimos una
expertise of
metodología.
every
Bueno,
person,
¿cómo vamos
and
a
we
medir
define a
en
methodology.
Chile
We,
gasto público en cambio climático,
we established how we were going to measure
nacional, área de
expenses
aprendizaje?
on a
Obviamente
climate
entender
matters,
metodológicamente cómo
and this was a whole
cómo se da
experience
participación y
that
contribución.
involved lots
Y a
of
partir de esa
lessons learned.
metodología ya se han
And
elaborado
from that methodology,
conté nueve
I
reportes en
counted
los que se ha
9
medido el gasto climático
reports.
a partir de obviamente distintas fuentes de
We
información.
started with different
De hecho, la
sources of
ley, el
information,
marco de cambio
and
climático fue hace poco, en
actually,
el
the
2022,
framework
establece
of
como
climate
regulación
change
a la
that
dirección de
was published in
presupuestos, que
Chile,
pretende
it
y
established
define
the
la
regulation of
actualización,
budget
la obligación de reportar
linked
anualmente al
to
Congreso cuánto es
these
el
different
compromiso nacional
ministries. And we
climático.
needed to understand what was
Septiembre del año
the
pasado se
climate
publicó el
expense that we were
tercer
having.
informe de
Last
climate,
year, we
ya
published the
obviamente
third
efectivamente se inició
report,
con el apoyo de esta metodología, ya estableció
and
las
we
capacidades
were able to
del Ministerio
establish
con
the
continuar con esas
capabilities
mediciones
between
y que ahora incluso
within the
hemos
ministry.
puesto nuevos límites, entender, por ejemplo, cuánto el gasto regional en cambio climático.
We were
Recuerdo que
able
en
to
los
understand how
análisis
was
que hemos
the
hecho en la
regional
etapa
expenses
mensual,
when
bueno,
it
el gasto
comes to
regional
climate
ocurre algo
change,
distinto, las prioridades son
when it
distintas,
comes to the
recuerden que hay mayores
regional
gastos en
expenses. Know that we have a
forestal,
higher expense in
hay nuevas
mitigation.
trabas porque también
We have
las
lots of
plataformas que se utilizan para cuantificar el gasto
um,
son distintas, las normas que rigen también
bumps
son
along the
distintas,
road.
entonces nos encontramos con nuevos
We found that we
desafíos
have
y ahí
different
me
ways
surgió la
of
idea de,
determining
bueno,
such expenses and new
tenemos que ser
challenges.
gestores, estos
And we have the
indicadores de gastos
idea of
climáticos y
generating
hasta ahora
these
todo lo que hemos
climate change
hecho
markers because up
era
to now,
análisis post del gasto
everything that we
climático
have
y cada vez
done
es mucho más
was
difícil y nosotros
posterior
alinear todo el gasto, toda
analysis
la
of the
inversión en
expenses. So
planifique al
looking
año
at all
durante
of
el
the
año y
projects and
fijarle ahí si a esto le
investments
corresponde
that happened
participar o no
throughout the
climático,
year,
en esta parte algo
we
así como
needed
GIF
to sort
proyectos.
out if
Entonces, bueno,
everything was
surgió esta idea
related
de
to
generar estos
climate or
registros que
not.
permitan al
We
formulador de
had the
proyecto,
idea
una vez
of
que
developing these
incorpora su
markers
proyecto a la
or
cartera de proyectos,
indicators that
definitivamente
once
sabe
we
si, bueno, este
incorporated this
proyecto
to a
sí corresponde con
portfolio, we
intervenciones,
could
si no
brand them
corresponde.
as this
Y obviamente
corresponds to
esperamos que pueda facilitar
mitigation
mucho más
or
la revisión
such.
en los
And we
próximos años
believe that
posteriores. Estas
this is
descripciones
going to help us
a
to
nivel
have
central
this
se
type of
incorporaron
indicators.
en junio de
We
2024,
incorporated
entonces
those
llevamos
in
muy
June
poquito en su
2024. So
implementación.
actually,
Obviamente hemos
its
hecho
implementation
distintas
has not been long.
capacitaciones
We have
con
done
distintos
lots of
organismos
training with the
y
different
ocurre a
NGOs,
nivel
and
regional.
this
Una
indicator
plataforma
in
que
a
parte
regional
con nosotros
level,
y
it's
otros
a
gobiernos
platform
regionales
that it is used
fue
by
creado
the
hace
regional
te diría, 4 meses.
governments. This was
Estamos
created
todavía en
about
proceso
4
de
months ago. We
reflexión, de
are in
generar también esto
process
del
of
material de
training and
ejercicio para
developing
ser implementados
this
correctamente.
material
Pero eso un
in
poco cómo
order
surgió
to
y
implement
creemos
them
que es
suitably.
necesario no solamente,
And
y acá también lo
we
queremos resaltar
understand
con otro proyecto que hemos estado
that
desarrollando,
it is necessary
en el fondo, ¿cuál es el objetivo que uno quiere
to
cumplir cuando
understand what's the
dice quiero
objective.
medir el gasto climático?
When I want to
Porque a
say
veces
I want to
asociamos como proyecto
measure
estamos
the
gastando
climate
esto otro.
expenses, it's not only
Y
saying
yo creo
I
que la
am
respuesta es
spending
no.
in
Lo que
this
nos
or
pregunta es,
that.
bueno, ¿cómo alineamos
The
eso que
response
estamos
is
gastando de
how are we
forma
going to
táctica o de forma
align
más
the
eficiente?
expenses in
Y
the best
nosotros
way to
hicimos ir un
have the
poco más
most
allá con la estrategia financiera de cambio
efficiency out of the
climático.
budget?
Costeamos los compromisos que tenía el
So
país en
we
materia
need to
climática.
consider
Entonces,
the
preparamos
cost
la
of the
estrategia climática a
country.
largo plazo.
We understand what is
Esa
going
su
to
meta y
be
medir
our
y hicimos un
climatic
ejercicio de costeo.
strategy or our
Y
climate
con eso
strategy, sorry.
dijimos, bueno,
And we
efectivamente
analyzed that
cumplimos
and we
los
said,
objetivos climáticos
okay,
que están
we have
contemplados en
complied
nuestra
with
estrategia.
our
Entonces,
climate
nuestra estrategia nos
objectives
cuesta
within
esta
our
cantidad de dinero.
strategy,
Bueno, ¿cuánto
and
estamos
this
gastando?
cost this amount of money.
¿Y cuál es la brecha que nos queda
We
por
need to
trabajar?
understand what are the
La brecha es
expenses
irreemplazable.
and
O sea,
the
nosotros
gap,
estamos gastando
everything
más en
that
sectores
still needs to be
que
accomplished, because
complican
sometimes
o
you could
hay
be
áreas que
spending more money in
requieren más
sectors,
financiamiento. Entonces, ¿cómo hacemos esa
um,
asignación de
and
financiamiento mucho más
that means that there
eficiente?
are other areas
Y
that
ahí
have
es donde
less
nos
financing.
encontramos hoy,
And what we have
entonces, considera
found
obviamente tener
today,
transversalmente, bueno, qué metas queremos
considering
tener,
this
implementar
gap,
nosotros para poder cerrar esta
it's
brecha financiera.
basically understanding that there are some
Eso
actions
es
that
un
we need
poco
to have to reduce the
la
gaps.
razón
So
de lo que hemos
that
estado
could be
buscando
the
llegar a
description
más costeo
of all of
también
the
de recursos.
expenses and how are we going to accomplish our own commitments.
Fantástico,
Thank you.
muchísimas gracias.
No, thank you.
Ahora me gustaría volver con
I would
Eric.
like to go
Eric,
back
has
with
comentado
Eric.
brevemente sobre el
Eric, you
diseño
briefly
de diferentes
mentioned the
taxonomías.
design on different
¿Puedes
taxonomies.
elaborar un poco sobre el
I don't know
proceso de
if maybe
implementación de la
you
taxonomía
could
nacional
discuss the
y también
process
el
of
resto de
national taxonomy
países
implementation as well as
Gracias.
other
Claro, muchísimas
taxonomies as
gracias.
well.
Eh,
Thank you.
a ver, esta taxonomía sostenible en México
The
lleva
sustainable
poquito
taxonomy
menos,
in
más o menos 2
Mexico
años
has less
desde
than
que
2 years of
se publicó.
its being
Como les
published,
decía, tiene
and
componentes
it has
muy, pues muy enfocados a
components
asegurar
that are
que
focused
la contribución
on
principal, que en este
making
caso es la
sure
creación de gases de efecto
that the
invernadero, esté
main
pues muy
contribution
bien
on
delimitada,
greenhouse
y también un componente
gas
de no
mitigation
daño
is properly
significativo. Y
implemented,
como les decía, también
and
tiene aparte un componente de género.
non-harmful
Entonces,
damage. And also there's
si bien la taxonomía es una taxonomía
a
muy completa,
gender
la verdad es que también
component.
es una
The
taxonomía pues
taxonomy is
bastante
complete, but it is
robusta, ¿no?
also
Entonces,
a
desde la
robust
perspectiva, y
one.
aquí tal vez nosotros jugamos
From
un doble
the
papel, ¿no? Porque si bien
perspective
estuvimos en la
that
parte
we're
de diseño,
considering, and
pues
this is
ahora
where we
también la
have a
tenemos que
double
aplicar, ¿no?
role,
Y esto suele ser
we
normalmente
need to
reglado
include
en la
its
taxonomía, ¿no?
implementation. Regularly, that's the challenge of all taxonomies. But along that line, we have an implementation process. We are aligned with taxonomies when it comes to the projects being demanded. And this is a process where we are involving all the financial sector in the same fashion. Relatively, it's simple to identify the type of projects demanded by the taxonomy. This is a virtue, but taxonomy would ask you to have a definition of practices. And also, you need to check other things, like, for example, use of water, use of harmful agrochemics, and the challenge has been on how we can actually influence the economical sector or the financial sector for them to report to us. Furthermore, we have a process where we are trying to obtain information from projects without going through intermediaries. The use of satellite and other type of information technologies have helped us to go near to our own evaluation in order to have cost-effective measurements. We could verify many things with geospatial imaging. We have georeferencing of all of the buildings or areas that we're actually financing in order to see what's within the agricultural lands. And this implementation has been gradual. It's easy to identify type of projects like renewable energy and others. And there's other type of information which is quite cost effective, like, for example, data, satellite information, which is where we're making progress. And there are other types, for example, gender identification of agrochemical components. And we're actually not there yet. So I will have to say that if we divide it in 3 parts, I think we're close to 66%. But the process is gradual. Not only for FIRA, the challenge is to have the competences to reach our goals. It is not only winging it or doing a checklist. This is about understanding where are the challenges. We need to help companies to transit towards a sustainable model. So this alignment definitely is going to take some time. And I should mention that we are leading efforts on publishing more information on taxonomy, providing training. We have created a pilot when we have had a proper assessment. We have defined that the sustainable taxonomy in Mexico was aligned with the European taxonomy. They can actually talk with one another. They are suitable for one another, and we have defined other aspects where we could actually work on. We had a first round of experiences, and we are working on the content. We are also working for the main parameters to expand not only towards mitigation, but also biodiversity. So we are trying to get there, and we are trying to integrate this further into our operations, not only on the emission, but also in all of our operations. We have some financial programs, special financial programs. One is called Pro Sustainable, Pro Sostenible in Spanish. It helps us to have a good interest rates in the projects. And what we are trying to do this is reformulate this project to align with a sustainable taxonomy in Mexico. This is a tool that is going to take some time to implement this at 100%, but it is leading the effort towards the budget of sustainable development. Thank you, Eric. Now we are going to hear a little bit more about lessons learned before going to the final round. Maria, I don't know if you want to discuss the recent project on the design on the Chile's taxonomy. Thanks, Nergis. I would like to mention the origin of taxonomy. This was the result of a requirement of the private sector. We believe that this has strengthened taxonomy and its posterior use. We have a public and private finance debate table when we have the Ministry of Finance and different entities of the financial sector and other associates. We have the Banking Association, the financial groups, among others, and we have a whole work of supporting the process of these institutions. We needed to be aligned with the sustainable development within the portfolios, and this is where we have this uncertainty on the financial sector to understand how are we identifying if somebody in the investing field is if this project is sustainable or not. And this is where we have the challenge of saying, okay, let's work on a taxonomy. But I would like to mention the process as well, because it had a robust governance. When we started establishing this taxonomy, we have a committee with international and national experts that did a whole analysis on the Chilean ecosystem and how we could actually implement and elaborate a taxonomy for the country. This committee concluded with a route map, and we started working on a governance structure. We have the constructive committee, the technical committee as well. So the objective was having a technical proposal. We were not actually ourselves from the government working on that, but the experts were going to start defining the criteria to be used. And this was a public procedure as well. We had others that were able to join when it comes to criteria elaboration. We have leaders that were experts in the topic on how we could actually incorporate taxonomy to any type of activities. And I wanted to highlight the robust governance, as mentioned, and the private sector, actually, that helped us to be more robust, I will have to say. We started training the private, the financial sector, the productive sector as well, when it comes to our own taxonomy, how we can actually use it. We are living in a moment in which this taxonomy is not binding, it's voluntarily. We would like to have a more binding aspect. We are working on different consultancies. We are mapping the different legislations or regulations in a country. But right now, the taxonomy is an open door for us. And we are trying to see how we're going to implement the taxonomy in such policies, understand what would a bank need, for example, or a financial institution to start implementing this taxonomy. Because sometimes we need to change internal procedures, we need to request and understand different information. This is the moment that we're in today. We believe that we have had great progress for our country to have such document. Perfect. You have mentioned the relevance of training in several aspects, but now in the third round, I would like to to mention or to start discussing different lessons learned on impact as well. What lessons learned could you point out on your experience in Mexico, and what has been the impact on your country? Thank you, Eric. This question is for you. Gladly. In the previous question, I think I was starting to answer this one, but I kind of held it in. I believe that this implementation process have had lessons learned, but the design process as well. I would like to highlight two aspects. One, it is important that the taxonomy has all the ruling entities represented, because sometimes we are in a blind status regarding our own objectives. Sometimes these could be aligned with others, that's correct, but as soon as we have a taxonomy that will be something that we have all agreed upon, I think that that's the way of success for the taxonomy. And something that we understand, since we have had a double role, we are an institution that we have been involved in the design, we are related to implementation, but we know that this generates lots of empathy, because whatever you write, you're going to have to comply with. So understanding the reality outside, it's important to start weighing in what's written with what's outside. Sometimes we see criteria and we understand that it's not possible to comply that sometimes. Sometimes it's ideal, but we cannot do it. So we need to have a proper equilibrium with what's feasible at the moment. This is not about not performing a process. So we need to be more real about what we are writing. When it comes to implementation, we have different processes, particularly when we're talking about small producers or SMEs, for example. So the cost of monitoring others is way different. In this process, I believe that we could have more information on implementation. We're talking about hundreds of producers or thousands of producers in our own portfolio. So I think that to landing project after project and verifying all items in taxonomy, it's hard. So we need to add solutions time by time, not reducing the requirement, but try to see how we could actually accomplish this per groups, for example. I think the most important word here is cost effective, because the disadvantage of taxonomies is that sometimes we need to align the whys, the incentives that the key players have. And these incentives will be quite diminished if the cost is too high to be able to monitor. So having parameters that will be cost effective is relevant. We need to be able to use information technology, satellite data has been quite valuable. We have been actually being able to check all of this in the most immediate fashion. And to sum up, I think those are the lessons learned. We're still learning towards the application of such taxonomy. Thank you, Eric. Going back with Maria, I would like to ask you the same questions. What are the lessons learned from your own experience in Chile, and what has been the impact in your country? Thank you. I would like to divide this in my own experience or also lessons learned in a more general fashion on sustainable finance, discussing the public expenses and on climate change, there's a famous phrase saying that the perfect enemy, the perfect things are not are not without any mistake. So I think that we need to start measuring, and that's something of relevance. I think we have had minor pilots, and along the way we have been perfecting them. We have improved our methodology, reaching new phases of information, but I think that getting a move on, it's important. We're not gonna have the perfect equation, but if it's viable or feasible, it's more than sufficient. And thinking about the taxonomy and what Eric was mentioning, I believe that our challenge has been implementation. With a published taxonomy, we have found some barriers. For example, who's going to measure, who's going to supervise, maybe the company itself or a private company itself is going to do its valuation of its own company with the taxonomy. Who is going to verify that? Who is going to
Son interrogantes que hoy día todavía no estamos haciendo. Realmente esperamos que para cuando esto pueda ser más normativo, una política pública.
We believe that once we're there, we're going to have a public policy already in the midst.
Al inicio no comenzaría nunca a avanzar.
The thing is that if we are waiting to have all the answers, we're never going to move forward. I think that we're also moving forward with the companies, with the private institutions, for them to start thinking about this idea. The idea is to start learning together. If you are waiting to have the perfect scenario, you are never going to have the proper tool, at least if we want to make progress on the regulation side. That's the main answer that I wanted to provide. Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you for sharing your own experience. And for UNDP, it's important to hear from your lessons learned, your own experiences, and to continuing supporting your own countries and to contribute with different countries in the region for them to adapt with similar models. I would like to give the go-ahead to Grecia to see if we have any questions in the chat box. Thank you for such space. We have collected some questions. We have a first question. Particularly, this is FIRA, sorry. Have you estimated how much it could cost in a percentage if you have credit after credit analysis?
No lo hemos realizado. A ver, es que sí y no.
So the answer is yes and no. First of all, these bonds for getting credit, we need to understand that the cost and the access, when we are talking about some rural areas, it's not very easy to access. And then through the mandate that we hold, that we work through like a second floor stage, then we don't have such capacity. What that means is that we would have to ask all of our financial intermediaries or middlemen, and then they will ask me back, like, then what is our incentive, right? And then the answer, the right answer or the ideal answer would be for us to provide a bond. And then at this time, the taxonomies are voluntary. So then the incentive or the carrot, as we call it, is different. We want to support them with better financial solutions or better financial instruments or capacities. And that is producer-centered. And then we are not very focused on the middleman, of course, and they also want to get a benefit from it. And then if we take a look on the agri-food sector within the country, we see that there are a lot of challenges for this sector. And some people, when they see a unilateral proposal, there's always this risk of removing the incentives for these green financing instruments. So then we need to be very careful. So my answer is yes, on the side that we've worked with them by getting satellite information, for example, and these are not very expensive solutions. This is something perfectly doable, and that enables us to provide further monitoring of the activities, right? That they are within the borders of the country, that you're not into a protected reserve area, for example. We want to make sure that the resources that they are having are appropriate. So we are endorsing these technologies, we are implementing these technologies, and we want to help them get and track this information. And then on our side, we're also working on providing further support for this transition. We enable dialogue sessions in order for us to see how we can tackle these barriers. Unfortunately, we cannot provide credit by credit solutions, and we've managed everything through more digital means.
Perfecto, Eric. Muchísimas gracias.
Perfect, Eric. Thank you so much for your answer.
Okay, y tenemos una pregunta para
So now
María
moving
Ignacia.
forward to
¿Cómo es la coordinación entre el
the next
Ministerio de
question.
Hacienda y los demás ministerios
How does the
para el
Ministry of
monitoreo y
Finance coordinate
verificación
with
técnica?
other
¿Quién es el responsable final
ministries
de certificar
for
el cumplimiento de
the
indicadores
technical
ligados a sus
monitoring,
metas
and
de
who has the
mitigación y
final
adaptación?
say on the decisions regarding climate mitigation?
Gracias. Ahí no me quedó tan claro si era el uso de la taxonomía en general. Respondiendo para el caso de la taxonomía, hoy día como
So for the
comenté, la
taxonomies, what
elaboración
I
de la
can say
taxonomía
is
fue
that
un
when
trabajo
we
colaborativo
created
ministerial,
this taxonomy, this
pero hoy día la
was a
taxonomía
collaborative effort,
dado que es voluntaria, se aplica directamente,
and
cada
this
empresa la
is
aplica.
a
Y ahí donde
voluntary
hoy día como
taxonomy that each
mayores
company is able to
dudas o
apply, let's
desafíos
say.
de que cómo
And
se
then now we
verifica
are
esto.
facing some other
En
challenges and how we can identify
probablemente
this.
va a ir
Sometimes this
dependiendo
is
del
not
instrumento al que
clear.
se aplique la taxonomía. Si es que van a haber, por ejemplo, consultoras especializadas.
If, for example, there is a specialist or an advisor that they need to get proper certification, if there are some guidelines or if they are following on a specific national policy. So how we can verify that? That is something that we are currently working on.
Perfecto, María Ignacia. Muchas gracias.
Perfect,
Y bueno,
Maria
quería
Ignacia. Thank
agradecer
you so
nuevamente
much.
a nuestros
And I
dos
wanted to
expositores del día
thank
de hoy,
both
que
Maria
nos han acompañado
Ignacia
en
and
esta
Eric,
última
who have
sesión.
been joining
Ha sido
us
temas
for these
bastante
last
interesantes
sessions. We've
acerca de
had really
taxonomía.
interesting
Y
topics
para
regarding
poder cerrar
taxonomies.
este
And in
espacio, me
order for us to
gustaría
wrap up
abrir
this
el micrófono
session, I
para
would like
Rocío y que nos pueda dar
to give the
estas
floor
ideas
to
generales y
Rocio so she can
conclusiones
share
de
some
la
closing
sesión.
remarks and conclusions for today's session. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone.
Perfecto.
Are you able to hear me well? Excellent. Thank you. Yes, go ahead. Well, I think that I have been present in the last 6 sessions, well, all the sessions, and instead of focusing on the more technical side of what Maria Ignacia and Eric shared, we were talking about more into practical terms of the experiences and the lessons learned. And now I would like to recall some of the ideas that Maria Ignacia shared on how we can extrapolate some of these solutions and strategies to other contexts. In that sense, I would like to make an echo on what Maria Ignacia shared. that there is this importance of these enabling frameworks. And then she mentioned that this is something that was born through the private sector in Chile, because these spaces that the government needs to foster are very important. So then it's very important to take that into account. Second of all, we've managed to get support from the public sector to be able to foster a stronger verification process. We have also talked about blended finance and bonds, and it's very important to have this intervention through the taxonomies to talk about creating scientific frameworks. Yes, I apologize for the noise because where I live, there's a construction nearby, and now it's noisy here too. So again, what are the incentives that the public sector is able to enable for the private sector to join? And this is key, because in many of the instruments, we've noticed that we need to leverage the private sector participation, because there are a lot of resources to fight against climate change. And that's where the investments come from. So then it's no longer a matter of the public sector itself, but of the private sector to hold these taxonomies, to be able to provide a more clear and transparent framework of what sustainable finances are. And this also applies in many ways, like in what kind of bonds are we able to create, what kind of investments are truly green and not considered as greenwashing. And we've also seen the commitment coming from the regional and national governments, and their participation is key. So these spaces are very important to ensure that these solutions are truly sustainable and that they are contributing to the different goals at a national, regional level, or even some other international agreements, such as the Paris Agreement, for example. But it's very important to tailor these standards to a regional and national level. So we've already discussed the role of the state to be able to get these warranties from the government side. So I would like to thank both of our panelists, Maria Ignacia and Eric, to provide us with all of these know-how and lessons learned that you just shared, because this is very helpful for us to have a better articulation of our own considerations. Thank you so much, Rocio, for your words. And again, I would like to once more thank our panelists, and I would like to thank all of the participants who have joined throughout these whole 6 sessions that we've held. And with that, we've also had the opportunity to be able to hear from our experts, to share experiences, and to really value the lessons learned that we can leverage for green finance. So before wrapping up today's session, I would also like to thank to all the people who are joining us through different platforms, whether it is YouTube or the UNDP platform. And I would like to also mention that we will be in touch very, very soon when we will, as soon as we will publish the success stories, and this will be available for everyone interested, and you will be able to have access to all of these sessions, to these recorded sessions of GIF4LAC. So again, thank you so much, and we'll hope to see you very soon. Thank you.
Gracias, hasta luego.
Muchas gracias. Gracias, María Ignacia. Gracias, Eric. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a todos.